Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey into pharmacology, the science of how drugs and medications interact with living organisms.
That's right.
We've gathered quite a bit of source material, and our aim really is to unpack the key concepts, look at its history, and show just how wide-ranging its impact actually is. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. So pharmacology, at its heart, is the study of drugs. Our sources break it down pretty clearly. It covers everything from where a substance comes from, what it's made of, to how the body handles it. That's pharmacokinetics. And then what the substance does to the body, pharmacodynamics.
Right.
And it also looks at therapeutic use, so how it can heal, but also toxicology, the potential harm. Is basically understanding that whole interaction between chemicals and living things. And if those chemicals have medicinal properties, well, then we call them pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so it's a really big field then. Let's maybe start with the name itself, pharmacology. It sounds quite technical, but you mentioned its roots are, well, a bit more primal.
They are, yeah. It comes from the Greek word pharmakon. And what's interesting about pharmakon is that it meant both drug and poison.
Wow, okay.
That's telling.
It is, and that's combined with logia, which just means study of. But the connection gets even deeper because pharmakon is linked to pharmakos.
Pharmakos.
Yeah, in ancient Greece, that was a ritual sacrifice, a sort of human scapegoat, essentially. It really points to this very old understanding that certain substances had immense power that could be double-edged, life-altering stuff.
From ritual scapegoat to, well, modern medicine. That's quite the journey hidden in a word. And today, pharmakon isn't just about prescription drugs, is it?
Not at all. The modern use of pharmakon is much broader. It includes substances, our own bodies make endogenous substances, plus other things that are biologically active but maybe aren't used as typical drugs.
Like what, for example?
Well, think about agonists or antagonists molecules that either switch receptors on or block them. Or enzyme inhibitors, like the monoamine oxidase inhibitors used for depression. They all fall under this wider umbrella now. Got it. Now, here's something I think confuses a lot of people, myself included sometimes. Pharmacology versus pharmacy. They sound almost the same, but they're definitely different jobs, right?
That's a really common point of confusion, and it's important to clarify. Pharmacology is basically biomedical science. It's about research, discovery, asking how chemicals work in living systems.
The fundamental science part.
Exactly, the how and why. Pharmacy, on the other hand, is a health services profession. Pharmacists take all that knowledge from pharmacology and apply it in clinical settings, dealing directly with patients dispensing drugs, advising on use, making sure it's safe and effective.
So research versus application, discovery versus delivery.
You could put it that way, yeah. Pharmacology builds the knowledge base. Pharmacy uses it for patient care.
Makes sense. Okay, let's rewind then. Where did this all start? It's kind of amazing that people were using some pretty potent natural stuff ages ago.
It really is. The sources mention opium from poppies being used way before 1100 BCE. That's a long time ago.
Definitely.
And morphine, which is the main active compound in opium, wasn't actually isolated until 1804. But what's fascinating now is we know how it works. It's an opioid agonist. It fits into specific receptors in our bodies, opioid receptors, and triggers pain relief. People were using this complex chemical tool without knowing anything about the molecular machinery involved.
Just based on observation, presumably? This poppy stuff makes the pain go away.
Pretty much. So for centuries, maybe millennia, it was all about observation and experience. We start seeing a more systematic approach emerge around the Middle Ages.
Okay, how so?
Well, that's when it feels like pharmacognosy, the study of medicinal plants, really taking shape, and hugely influential texts like Avicenna's Canon of Medicine appear. Early pharmacology was very focused on herbalism, plant extracts, knowledge collected in pharmacopoeias.
These big books of plant remedies.
Exactly. People use crude drugs from nature forever, basically, but purifying the active ingredients, that came much, much later.
And what about all the traditional medicine systems, like in China or Tibet? How do they fit into this story?
They're absolutely part of it. Traditional Chinese medicine, Mongolian, Tibetan, Korean systems, they all represent incredibly old forms of essentially pharmacological practice. Lots of empirical knowledge built up over centuries.
Though modern science might view some of it differently now.
Well, yes, some practices are now considered pseudoscience. But these traditions often hold really valuable observations about how natural substances affect the body. And you also had things like entheogens, psychoactive substances used in spiritual contexts. Another way people explored how chemicals impact biology and consciousness.
So a mix of observation, tradition, ritual. When did it start to feel more like, well, science as we know it?
The shift really picks up in the 17th and 18th centuries. You had figures like Nicholas Culpeper in England translating texts,
Mm,
making knowledge about plants and their uses more accessible.
right.
And William Withering in the 18th century did some groundbreaking work, really laying down the foundations for clinical pharmacology with his studies, like on digitalis from Foxglove. But pharmacology as its own distinct scientific discipline, that really solidified in the mid-19th century. There was a big resurgence in biomedical science then. Before that, explanations for drug actions were often, well, pretty
Well,
vague.
and that's when universities started creating actual departments for it.
Precisely. Rudolf Buchheim set up the very first one in 1847 at the University of Tartu. The goal was specifically to understand how drugs and poisons actually worked. England followed later, 1905, at University College London.
So the institutional shift, and what about the tools? Were there key inventions that helped researchers dig deeper?
Oh, definitely. The organ bath was huge. It let researchers test drugs on isolated tissues outside the body in a controlled way, see how muscles contracted or relaxed, that kind of thing.
Direct measurement.
Exactly.
Correct.
And then a bit later in 1945, the ligand binding assay. That allowed scientists to actually measure how strongly a drug binds to its target, like a receptor. Quantifying the interaction, those tools were absolutely crucial for moving beyond just observation.
And that leads us to modern pharmacology, which sounds incredibly complex now.
It really is. Modern pharmacology uses everything: genetics, molecular biology, biochemistry, advanced imaging, computational modeling, you name it. The aim is to understand things at the molecular level, find new targets, design better therapies, diagnostics, preventative measures,
Mm.
and even personalized medicine for individuals.
It's come such a long way. Okay, so let's break down this huge field. What are some of the major divisions within pharmacology? You mentioned it's diverse.
It is, yeah. One way to slice it is by the body system involved. So you have neuropharmacology that's all about the brain and nerves.
Central and peripheral nervous systems.
Right. Then immunopharmacology focuses on the immune system. Cardiovascular pharmacology deals with the heart and blood vessels, renal
Mhm.
with the kidneys, endocrine with hormones. You get the idea. Specialized areas.
And psychopharmacology is a big one, right? Drugs affecting the mind.
Absolutely. Psychopharmacology looks at drugs that influence psyche, mind, behavior. Think antidepressants, antipsychotics. It draws heavily on neuropharmacology, but also behavioral science, trying to understand mental disorders and how drugs can help treat them. And there's neuropsychopharmacology, too, really focusing on that intersection of brain function and mental state.
Then you have these newer emosomics fields.
Mm.
Pharmacometabolomics. That sounds intense.
It sounds complicated, but the concept is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Metabolomics studies all the small molecules, metabolites in our system. Pharmacometabolomics uses that to see how drugs change that metabolic fingerprint.
So like tracking the chemical echoes of a drug.
That's a good way to put it. You measure metabolites in blood or urine after someone takes a drug, and it helps predict how they'll process it or monitor its effects on their metabolism. Gives a very detailed picture.
And pharmacomicrobiomics, that brings in our gut bacteria.
Exactly. It studies how the trillions of microbes in our gut, our microbiome, influence how we handle drugs. It turns out they can have a massive impact on drug absorption, metabolism, even toxicity. It's a huge, rapidly growing area. Who knew gut bugs were so important for meds?
It's wild. And then the genetic side, pharmacogenomics and pharmacogenetics. What's the difference there?
They're closely related. Uh, Pharmacogenomics is sort of the big picture, using genome-wide approaches to see how all our genes influence drug response. Pharmacogenetics zooms in more, looking at variations in specific individual genes and how that leads to different reactions to drugs.
Okay, broad versus specific genes.
Right. And then you've also got pharmacoepigenetics. That looks at changes on the DNA, not in the DNA sequence itself, epigenetic marks that affect how genes are read and how that influences drug response too.
So it's not just the genes, but how they're expressed.
Precisely. It adds another layer of complexity and another step towards truly personalized medicine.
Incredible detail. Okay, let's shift focus a bit. How does all this science translate into actual medical practice? Clinical pharmacology comes in here.
Yes, clinical pharmacology is really the bridge. It applies all those pharmacological methods and principles directly to studying drugs in humans. Things like figuring out the right dose. That's a whole field called posology.
And you mentioned toxicology earlier, the study of harm. How do pharmacology and toxicology relate?
They're two sides of the same coin, really. Both study chemical actions.
Yeah.
But pharmacology is primarily looking for the therapeutic effects, the benefits. Toxicology is focused on the adverse effects, the harm, and assessing risk.
Finding the good versus identifying the bad.
Essentially, yes, though often the same substance can do both depending on the dose. That's a key concept.
And all this knowledge underpins pharmacotherapy using drugs to treat illness.
Exactly. You need that pharmacological understanding to choose the right drug, the right dose, for the right patient, for the right amount of time. It's fundamental to medicine and pharmacy.
Now, drug discovery. That sounds like the really exciting but also maybe daunting part, creating new medicines from scratch.
It is exciting and definitely daunting. It's the whole process. It starts with drug design, the creative part, finding molecules that might work, often designing them to fit a specific biological target, like a receptor or enzyme.
Like designing a specific key for a lock.
Kind of, yeah. Then, once you have a promising lead compound, you move into drug development. That's the long, rigorous, expensive part, testing, refining, making sure it's safe and effective enough to actually bring to market.
And economics plays a big role here, right? Pharmacoeconomics?
Absolutely. Is the drug worth the cost? That's what pharmacoeconomics looks at, the value proposition for healthcare systems. You also have pharmaceutical engineering dealing with the practicalities, how to make the drug consistently, formulate it properly. And safety pharmacology is constantly looking for potential unexpected side effects throughout the process.
So it's a massive regulated undertaking. What does that cycle generally look like?
It's incredibly controlled. You've got agencies like the FDA in the US, the EMA in Europe, setting very strict rules.
Makes sense for safety.
Totally. It starts with preclinical work,
Mhm.
lots of lab tests, computer modeling, animal studies. They look at how the drug is metabolized, whether it's toxic.
Yeah.
They study the structure-activity relationship, or SAR.
Meaning how changing the shape changes the effect.
Exactly. Tweaking the molecule to make it better, safer. They might make hundreds of variations analogs. Then, if it looks promising, it moves into human clinical trials.
And that takes years, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Multiple phases, often 6 years or even more. Testing for safety first in small groups, then effectiveness in larger groups. It's a huge investment. The sources say maybe only 1 in 5,000 potential drugs actually makes it all the way.
Wow, 1 in 5,000. And costing over $1 billion.
Easily. That explains why companies need patents and why they do market research. They need to recoup those costs somehow. There's even something called the inverse benefit law, suggesting sometimes the most heavily marketed drugs aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest clinical benefit.
Interesting point.
And of course, you always have to account for the placebo effect when testing. Is the drug really working, or is it just the power of suggestion? It's a complex mix of science, regulation, and business.
Definitely complex. Okay, broadening out again. What about looking at drugs in whole populations? Pharmacoepidemiology.
Right. That field studies how drug effects vary across different groups of people in the real world. It combines clinical pharmacology with epidemiology, the study of disease patterns in populations.
And pharmacoenvironmentology, that's the drug pollution angle.
Yep. What happens to all these drugs and personal care products after we use them? They end up in wastewater, in the environment. This field studies those ecological impacts. It connects human health back to environmental health.
A connection we probably don't think about enough. And ethnopharmacology adds the cultural layer.
It does. It looks at traditional medicine uses in different cultures, the historical context, the anthropological side of how people have used medicinal substances.
And finally, looking ahead, you mentioned photopharmacology. Light-activated drugs. That sounds like sci-fi.
It sounds futuristic, but it's a real emerging field. The idea is to create drugs you can switch on or off using specific wavelengths of light.
Why would you want to do that?
Precision. Imagine activating a drug only exactly where it's needed, right in a tumor. For instance, minimizing side effects elsewhere, or switching it off quickly if needed. Plus, maybe less environmental contamination if inactive drug gets out. It's very cutting edge.
Very cool. Okay, let's dig into the core theories now. Understanding why drugs work at that fundamental molecular level.
Right. It's not enough to know that a drug works. Pharmacology wants to know how. And that requires understanding the biological systems involved, cell biology, biochemistry. As our knowledge there grows, so does our understanding of drug action.
So you can analyze receptors, pathways.
Exactly. And then design chemicals to interact with them very specifically. Which brings us back to those two key concepts, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics.
What the body does to the drug and what the drug does to the body.
Precisely. Kinetics is the journey absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. Dynamics is the effect therapeutic or toxic.
Let's look closer at pharmacodynamics then. It's often about ligands binding to receptors.
Very often, yes. A ligand is just a molecule that binds Could be a drug, could be something our body makes naturally, like a neurotransmitter. It binds to a receptor, usually a protein.
And that binding causes something to happen or not happen.
Right. An agonist binds and activates the receptor, causing a response. Think of it like turning a key and opening the door. A partial agonist turns the key, but maybe only opens the door a partway weaker response. An antagonist binds, but does nothing itself. It just blocks the keyhole so the agonist can't get in.
Okay. And then we talk about efficacy and potency. How are they different?
Efficacy is about how much response a drug can produce, its maximum effect. On a graph, it's the height of the effect curve. Potency is about how much drug you need to get a certain level of response, often 50% of the maximum effect. That's the EC50.
So a potent drug works at lower doses.
Exactly. Lower EC50 means higher potency. A drug could be very potent but have low efficacy, or vice versa. They're distinct measures. Affinity, how tightly the drug binds, influences both, but especially efficacy.
And the therapeutic index that tells us about safety margin.
Yes, it's crucial. It's a ratio between the dose that causes the desired effect and the dose that causes toxicity. A wide therapeutic index means there's a big gap between the helpful dose and the harmful dose, generally safer.
Like paracetamol, maybe?
Relatively wide, yes. Whereas something like warfarin, a blood thinner, has a narrow therapeutic index. The dose has to be managed very carefully.
Yeah.
Small changes can push it from effective to dangerous.
Got it. Okay, now pharmacokinetics, the LADME process. Can you break that down?
Sure. LADME, liberation, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion.
Liberate.
That's just the drug getting released from its form. The pill dissolving, the patch releasing. Then absorption is the drug getting into the bloodstream.
How it gets in.
Right. Distribution is how it spreads around the body to different tissues. Metabolism is the body chemically changing the drug, often in the liver. This can make it inactive or sometimes active or even toxic.
And finally, excretion.
Getting rid of it, usually via kidneys and urine or sometimes in bile and out through feces. Understanding all these ADME steps is critical for dosing. How often do you need to take it? How much?
And things like whether a drug dissolves in fat or water really matter here.
Hugely. A drug's physicochemical properties, its size, charge, lipophilicity, fat-loving nature, determine how easily it gets absorbed, where it goes in the body, how it's broken down and removed. Bioavailability, how much of the dose actually reaches the blood unchanged, is a key outcome of these properties.
Makes sense. You need some fat solubility to cross cell membranes.
Generally, yes. And then drugs tend to concentrate more in organs with lots of blood flow, like the brain, liver, kidneys.
So all this incredibly detailed science directly informs drug policy and safety regulations.
Absolutely, it has to. Regulatory bodies like the FDA or the UK's MHRA rely completely on this pharmacological data. The FDA, for example, requires proof of effectiveness, usually meaning better than placebo in at least 2 good trials in safety.
Which involves all that animal testing and human trials we talked about.
Extensive testing. It takes years. They need to be confident the benefits outweigh the risks for the intended use.
And the approved doses are set within that therapeutic window we discussed.
That's the goal, yes. Finding the dose range that works for most people in the target population without causing unacceptable side effects. Laws like the Prescription Drug Marketing Act in the U.S. add more layers of control over safety and effectiveness.
Okay. And lastly, the field itself. It's supported by professional societies, education.
Oh, absolutely. There are international bodies like IUPR, the International Union of Basic and Clinical Pharmacology, that help guide the field, and various classification systems to organize drugs, like ATC codes.
And studying it requires a broad background.
Definitely. Physiology, pathology, chemistry are core. Increasingly, biophysics, computational science too, it's very interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
Pharmacists need this knowledge daily. Pharmacologists are usually the ones doing the research in universities, industry, government labs.
Lots of career paths.
Yeah. Academia, pharma companies, biotech, science writing, regulatory affairs, patent law. It has wide applications. And it's a fundamental part of training for doctors and pharmacists.
Well, this has certainly been a comprehensive deep dive into pharmacology. It's a really clear just how massive and dynamic this field is, from ancient potions to personalized medicine.
It really is. The journey from just observing that, say, willow bark helps pain to understanding aspirin's molecular action on cyclooxygenase enzymes, it's incredible progress. And it touches so many areas: biology, chemistry, medicine, environment, culture.
And it really underscores that constant tightrope walk, doesn't it? Seeking the benefit while managing the risk.
Always. That pharmacon concept, drug and poison, is still relevant.
So, Looking ahead, as we understand biology even better, maybe we'll see even more targeted, safer drugs. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The potential for precision is huge.
But it also raises questions, perhaps. If we can tailor drugs so individually, what ethical considerations pop up?
A lot to mull over. Thank you for taking us through this fascinating world.
My pleasure. It's a field that never stands still.